All right, welcome everybody to another edition of Inside Boxing Weekly. Sorry about that. I'm your host for the tonight, Jeremiah Preisser, and I'm flying solo. Typically, I don't do that sort of thing unless my wife is asleep. Then I'm good to go, got the green light. But tonight I don't have any guests, so I'm just going to freestyle it a little bit tonight. I'm going to look at the news and see what I can find and just, tell you my thoughts on the topic. So I'm going to start with Billy Joe Saunders saying that he's the best at 160 pounds. Well, actually 160 and 168. And so, I mean, anybody who's rational, anybody who's been a boxing fan for an extended period of time knows that this claim is just downright stupid. I mean, Billy Joe is one of those guys who has had a rock-solid career so far. I mean, as I've pointed out in the past, he's, taken a good number of guys' zeros, Chris Eubank Jr., Fletcher, I believe John Ryder as well. So this is a guy who is highly skilled, a guy who is certainly near the top of the division. At 160, at least 168, he hasn't done anything to warrant anything of note, and certainly not fight the best guys up there. But he's shown, against a guy like David Lemieux, who is a serviceable pro, the guy who lacks certain skills and is always going to be able to get outboxed. But if you remember, the odds going into that fight were pretty close. I mean, they were about 50-50. I mean, Lemieux was a genuine puncher, and with Lemieux's up and down performances, it was just one of those things where most people saw it as a close and competitive fight, but it ended up turning into a rout in Billy Joe Saunders' favor. But again, this all goes back to the point of him being the quote-unquote best in this division and the one above it. Obviously, it's just not true. I mean, and he's quickly become one of those guys who sort of wasted his potential at the top and probably waiting around for the big paydays. He's seemed like he struggled to make weight on, a number of occasions. Some of his antics outside the ring have gotten him some hot water as well. And again, when you look at just how well the division 160 pounds is filled out. It's certainly become top heavy in recent years. Actually, it's just a rock solid division all the way through. And so there just isn't a chance in hell that he's even top three anymore. I mean, you've got to give that to, obviously, Alvarez number one, Golovkin number two. I know some of you strongly believe that Golovkin beat Alvarez in the two fights, and that's fine. I'm just working within the framework of, what the official decisions were. And so I'm honoring those. And then, of course, you got Danny Jacobs at number three, who is also fighting Canelo Alvarez and arguably beat Golovkin in their first fight. I know most people saw that as a Golovkin victory, but again, it's of no consequence here. Billy Joe Saunders is obviously not the best at 160 pounds. But I can tell you that I'd like to see him try and prove it. I mean, he's a slick southpaw. When he's got his shit together and his stamina's good, he looks like he can be a tough test for anybody. I mean, southpaws generally are. You just don't see him that often. So it's just one of those things where the proof has to be in the pudding. It's time to put up or shut up with him. Enough with this. Just wasting his time at the top and not fighting the guys that he's supposed to be fighting. And, he was banking on getting a vacant trinket shot at whoever this guy is. I don't know where he's from, Albania or I don't know. I don't even know if the guy's the best fighter in his division in his country. I really have no clue. Don't know who the guy is. And I follow the sport pretty closely. But I want to move on from that. And I also wanted to talk about David Benavidez and Anthony Dirrell being ordered by the WBC to have a fight. And I think that was the right move. I don't often give the Alphabet Soup organizations credit because they really don't deserve any, in my opinion. They've just they've done a lot of bad. And, without expounding upon that too far, just go back and read my articles. I talk about the weight classes and how there are too many of them. I write a long article about, the alphabet super organizations and the proliferation of titles. I also talk about Golovkin and how he was screwed by the system. So again, I've written extensively on this. I don't want to go too deep into it, but in this case, I think they made the right decision. David Benavidez deserves his shot at Anthony Dirrell. Again, I try to ignore these alphabet soup organizations as much as I can, but again, acknowledging the framework of the sport itself, it makes it awfully difficult to, just put them off altogether. So David Benavidez is getting a shot at Anthony Dirrell, and again, rightfully so. That used to be his trinket. Dirrell was kind of put in a gimme fight against Yildirim. He didn't perform that well. And so I think that tells me what it probably tells you as well, is that Benavidez is going to light Anthony Dirrell up when they finally get in the ring. Benavidez to me looks like an ascending, I don't know if I want to call him a star, but he certainly looks like a very talented guy. And, he chalks a lot of that up to, his sparring sessions with Golovkin. He wasn't that experienced. He didn't have a long amateur background. And he credits Golovkin for helping to mold and shape him. And he's turned out to be, I think he's already turned in a better career than his brother has, Jose Benavidez. Benavidez had a respectable performance against Terrence Crawford, but he's also one of those guys who's been off and on. He's had long bouts of inactivity and just hasn't put it all together. And again, that's to his detriment. But David Benavidez, to me, looks as if he's got a bit more dedication in the sport. He's calling these guys out. And Dirrell is in the crosshairs. And again, the WBC made the right choice. Yildirim, to me, getting a rematch with Anthony Dirrell, yeah, sure, the first fight was close. It was fun. The ending was unsatisfactory. But anybody who's familiar with Anthony Dirrell, I think even at this stage in the game, and to me he looks a bit past his best, even at this stage, if he wants to make the fight easier, he can. He made it more difficult by standing in Yildirim's wheelhouse, giving up ground, backing up to the ropes, and getting banged on a little bit. But if he wants to, he's got more wrinkles to his game. He can box a little bit. He can move a bit. And to me, it just seems as if, again, this is boxing, and many times you do have to let it play out in the ring to get that conclusive result. But to me, it just feels like Dirrell can do more. Yildirim didn't really hurt Anthony Dirrell all that badly in that fight, and Dirrell didn't really look like he was fading as a result of some of those clean punches. So again, to me, Dirrell is the better fighter, and Benavidez is the guy who should be getting a shot. And again, I have no problem saying that, again, Benavidez is I would say probably going to score a stoppage in that fight. But again, I'm glad it was ordered. So let's move on here. And again, I'm just kind of freestyling it tonight, just kind of, working my way down the news line and seeing what's up, seeing what's down. Looks like Mikey Garcia is going to talk to the WBC this week in regards to his 135-pound status. And unsurprisingly, they've been pretty nice with Mikey Garcia and what he's wanted to do. Again, this is why I don't like the alphabet soup organizations. They don't apply their rules uniformly. It just kind of seems whimsical, and they make it up as they go. With Mikey Garcia, he's been able to, it almost seemed like a setup when they stripped Linares of the WBC title. They let Zlaticanin fight a guy who was, I remember looking it up, though obviously it was a while ago. He ended up fighting that guy. I think he was Italian or something. I can't quite remember. Maybe he was from Peru. I don't remember. But Zlaticanin ended up fighting for the vacant trinket. And then they just gave Mikey Garcia a shot at it. To me, it just felt like a setup. And then they let Garcia, move up and down weight divisions and keep the trinket so as he pleases. And, so don't be surprised if the ruling comes down on the side of Garcia. I mean, if he chooses to go to 140 pounds and, fight there and maybe move down in the future, don't be surprised, again, if the WBC says, okay, well, you can hang on to your trinket. But I will tell you that if by some measure they do strip him, or they tell him he has to negotiate with so-and-so, or, he has to give it up, or they give him some stupid status like interim champion or whatever it is, if he chooses to come back down, he can fight the guy who wins the vacant title. That wouldn't surprise me either. But I will tell you that Luke Campbell is in line for that shot. So if Mikey Garcia decides to give it up, which I hope he doesn't, I think the Lomachenko fight is the biggest and best fight to be made at 135 right now. I think a lot of you will say that, there's been some luster that's been taken off of it. And I think that's true. If you had an undefeated Mikey Garcia going up against Lomachenko, and you realize that both of them, especially Garcia, is at his prime at that weight, that fight just has more appeal. But, Garcia took the risk. He ended up taking a loss, and it was a pretty clear defeat. But, I don't want it mistaken. I don't want to mistake it, because when you look at the landscape at 135, who else is there for Lomachenko to fight? I mean, Garcia, to me, is clear and away the best opponent there, regardless if he lost to Errol Spence Jr. So, back to what I was going to say is Luke Campbell is going to get a shot at some point in time. And this goes back to what I was telling you guys on some of the daily shows with Mike and I. When Anthony Crolla got the fight with Lomachenko, it was a political move. It wasn't, Crolla, to me, and I think, again, to most people, had not earned that shot like Luke Campbell had. But Eddie Hearn wants to milk Luke Campbell of more money because he has a higher ceiling. He's got greater potential. And and again, he will be in line for that shot. And if Mikey Garcia chooses to relinquish, Luke Campbell will probably fight a gimme for that one as well. So again, I'm going to move down the line here. All right. So it looks as if Dillian White is officially contesting the WBC's ruling on Wilder in Brazil. I don't think much of that. I don't think anything's going to come to fruition there, though I would like to see it. Again, any rational person realizes that Dillian White is clearly a better fighter than Brazil is. But the WBC and Al Heyman and, again, all the people working behind closed doors and rubbing elbows with one another, they need to save Deontay Wilder for one of the top dogs, especially a Fury rematch, maybe even Joshua. So, again, they're going to err on the side of Brazil here because the WBC can do whatever they want, right? I mean, and incredibly, and again, I encourage everybody to go and look at the rankings, if anything, just for a laugh. The WBC has Brazil rated over White. And again, White is clearly the better fighter there. But again, they're going to err on the side of Brazil here and Deontay Wilder, and not much is going to come of it, but they will say, they'll probably say something, just kind of as a consolation prize. They'll say, hey, well, maybe you get a special status, or, you're next in line, or whatever it may be. They'll make him feel good about being in his position, right? Because he still is in a high ranking in the WBC, but he's not going to get that shot. Everything's already set up. They're not going to jeopardize a Fury rematch or, again, a potential Joshua fight. So they're just going to keep moving on there. All right. And it also looks like Kazuto Ioka is going to fight Aston Palikte. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. For a vacant trinket. Anybody who's a hardcore boxing fan and follow these two guys, the latter was who fought Donnie Nietes and got, I believe, a controversial draw there, though most people saw Nietes winning. So it seems as if Nietes is declined the rematch there. So it seems as if Ioka, who just fought Nietes, is going to pick that up. And I've got to note that Nietes is in the pound for pound list on the ring. I believe he's also in there with Transnational, and he's a good fighter. But it's also, I think, worth noting that the majority of people I saw watch that fight had Ioka beating Nieti. So anyways, this is going to be an interesting fight. Ioka, I think, is doing pretty well for himself. He's a guy stylistically I've liked for a long time. Dedicated body puncher, quick hands, good combination puncher. So I'm expecting a decision. I'm expecting a decision win on his part. But it should be an interesting matchup, just based on what both these guys were able to do against Nietes. But again, I think Ioka was clearly the better operator in that regard. All right. I'm going to go with, let's see what else I got. Okay. I'm going to go with On This Day. And so this is a fight that I've talked about on Facebook before. I know somebody who's personal friends with Michael Nunn, and this, I think, was the creme de la creme of performances for him. So we're talking about his fight with Nunn-Kalambay, and this was for the middleweight championship of the world. This was, these guys were number 1 and number 2 in a division that was stacked. I mean, go look at the ring's annual rankings, in the post-Hagler period, in the post-Hagler period, so the late 80s to early 90s, this class was absolutely stacked. I mean, just the wealth of names that traveled through the ranks. It's just like a who's who, Leonard, Duran, Hearns, again, Nunn, Kalambay, Jones Jr., Hopkins, Reggie Johnson, who we've interviewed before, nice guy. Just a ton of talented guys there. But these two at this time happen to be 1 and 2, and nobody expected Michael Nunn to stop Kalambay in a round. I mean, Kalambay was a world-class operator, and in my opinion, probably more deserving of a Hall of Fame induction. And again, I'm not saying that he needs to be in the Hall of Fame. My standards would be a bit more like baseball's, where the best of the best deserve to get in. But Kalambay might be one of those guys. I mean, if you look at his record, he was able to beat Harold Graham. He beat Mike McCollum. And to me, the win over Mike McCollum is superior to anything Julian Jackson ever did. And he almost beat McCollum again. I mean, the second fight was close, and this was after the being starched by Michael Nunn. So, Kalambay was just an excellent fighter. Very, very good boxer, fantastic jab, great counterpuncher, just a real good styles guy. And he was up against Michael Nunn. I mean, and Nunn was Nunn was one of those guys who was really looked at as being special at the time. He had fantastic talent, really good size, just about everything you could want. He wasn't a great puncher, but he was certainly a good puncher. You look at some of the sparring partners and what they had to say about him, he could crack a bit. And, there's a reason why a lot of guys couldn't bum rush him. But he just had so much going for him. He could fight well. He could box well. In his run after, was quite good too. But the fight itself, again, you listen to all the pre-fight hype on HBO and what they think of this fight, and you consult the fans of those days. Just go back and look. Nobody expected a 1-round stoppage, and the stoppage itself, it was a shock, because a lot of these guys like to start the rounds off, just filling each other out, just jabbing, gauging distance, seeing what the other guy has. And, early on, Michael Nunn made a pivot to his right, threw a left hand, and that was all she wrote. It was a fantastic win. It was shocking to all of us, but it was just something I think you could rest your hat on. At the end of the day, if you do, you're Michael Nunn, and he just got out of prison not too long ago, and I'm sure he's got a lot of guys wanting to interview him and getting a hold of him. And, I've heard he's had opportunities, and I know he's going to be inducted into the West Coast Boxing Hall of Fame, this year, or I don't know if it's this year, but maybe next year. I know it's going to be soon. I know Rick Ferris and the guys over there got that all squared away, so he'll be pretty excited about that. And I did end up asking Christopher Benedict, a guy who who knows Michael Nunn personally, and wrote a number of Michael Nunn stories for us at The Grueling Truth. And, I guess he got a hold of the, International Boxing Hall of Fame and said, hey, is Michael going to get a shot at it? And I guess it was kind of non-committal. And so, we'll see if that ever comes off again. I'm not saying Michael Nunn deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. But again, when you look at guys like Buddy McGirt and Julian Jackson, and then you compare that to Michael Nunn's resume, again, I just have a hard time with that. I mean, it all just kind of seems whimsical, and I don't know how they're penning up these ballots and figuring the things out. It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. But it was a fantastic performance on Michael Nunn's part, and he ended up being, maybe this is off, but Nunn to me ended up being sort of like that era's Donald Curry. Like he was like his contemporary. Sorry, I'm going to say he was like his contemporary Donald Curry, where they both look like they had all-time great talent. I mean, you watch Michael Nunn outbox James Toney for most of the fight, and he gets a hiccup, and then he ends up getting stopped. But you just look at both of those guys, and it seemed like they had just about everything going for them. And for some reason or another, they just couldn't quite make the cut. You hear different stories surrounding each of those guys and why they weren't able to maintain their status. And to me, that's sort of what separates the all-time greats from the all-time goods. I mean, Nunn and Curry, to me, they weren't all-time greats. And again, just my opinion, I think the all-time greats are the only ones who should be in the Hall of Fame, except, and again, I made a note of this when I had John Responti on last week, except transcendent figures, guys who are real, like, again, people can talk all the crap they want about Sylvester Stallone being in the Boxing Hall of Fame, but he did a lot for boxing. I mean, those Rocky movies really did a lot of good for the sport. I mean, they're etched in the memories of guys who have seen those films, even younger guys like myself who didn't grow up during the era, didn't see that boxing on free TV and all this other stuff, and the Ali's and Holmes of the world. Again, it's those Rocky movies still have an indelible impression on the sport. And again, guys like Arturo Gatti, I don't want to get too far into that, but to me, you could argue that he was a transcendent figure, but again, by and large, it should just be the all-time greats. And so with that, I'm going to end this show. Fairly quick one. Again, it's just me flying solo tonight. But I want to tell you guys that we're sponsored by, the Retired Boxers Foundation. Go check them out on Facebook. Alex Ramos, he's been a guest of ours. Real nice guy, tries to do what he can for these guys, because boxing's a tough sport, and a lot of these guys don't have much in terms of financial hope after they hang up the gloves. And again, Ramos is doing all that he can. We're also brought to you by mybookie.ag. It's a betting platform. You can click the banner on the top of the page on the homepage of our website. You can just go to the website and enter TGT50 into the code, and you get a little something back. But I want to thank you guys. Each and every night you tune in to listen to me, to listen to Mike, listen to John Einrenhofer. We really, really appreciate it. And the amount of people that actually, listen in every night is more than I could have ever imagined. And we've been doing this for years now. I mean, we've got to be one of the longest running podcasts there is. I mean, we've been doing this, 3 years come April, 4 years come April. I know they were doing it a little while before I got on the team, but it's just been a long run. And again, I thank you guys so much for listening in, and I hope you all have a good night.